The Ghost Management Podcast with Marc-André Gagnon. Assistants Blue Miaorandong, Grace Dubaquier, Eric Mignon.
Episode 3 Marketing Through Patient Support Programs with Quinn Grundy.
Welcome to another episode of the Ghost Management Podcast, where we dive deep into the world of healthcare, patient advocacy, innovative solutions, and basically hidden corporate strategies to try to influence prescribing habits, drug sales, but not only for pharmaceuticals. We will be looking at other sectors as well, but at the moment, let's stick to pharmaceuticals because this is such a fascinating sector. Hi, Blue. How are you doing?
Hi, Mark. I'm great. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm fine. Hey, Blue, remember, you have this fantastic role to keep this discussion less academic, the least academic as possible, basically, in the sense that sometimes I might be inviting other prof and then we start discussing at an academic level. We don't want this type of language as much as possible for this podcast. So you're my inspector chief policing the discussion here. Blue, I wanted to tell you something I found this month I thought was absolutely fascinating. So we have the College of Pharmacists in Quebec, l'Ordre des pharmaciens. They have a Conseil de disciplines, so a disciplinary board. And they had this fantastic decision. I want to tell you about this one. There's this pharmacist, Martin Gilbert in Châteauguay, and basically being sanctioned for doing stuff that he wasn't supposed to do. And okay, let's have a look at the stuff. And basically what the guy did is that he collaborated, well, he had these exclusivity contracts. It was not really a contract, these were verbal contracts, but he had this exclusivity of providing prescription drugs to what we call patient support programs. Oh. And so a lot of very expensive drugs end up being given into the different infusion clinics, for example, or on different sites where you provide the services of a nurse. But the thing is, these are in specific places, and the drug is a very expensive drug. Maybe not all pharmacies can provide these drugs. So basically, he organized exclusivity with organization providing these patient support programs. Now in Canada, we have one drug, for example, Remicade, that we're selling something like $1 billion in Remicade a year. And the guy managed to obtain the exclusivity of distributing Remicade to all patient support programs in Quebec. So just in Remicade, he was making something like $60 million a year in sales of Remicade.
Oh, wow.
There's other drugs, Calkins, etc. But in the end, with only one distributor, he was buying something like $280 million a year from one distributor that basically was 80% of his supply. So basically revenues of more than $300 million a year. Now we need to keep in mind that total sales of prescription drugs in Quebec is $9 billion, more or less. So we end up with one pharmacist controlling 3% of the market for prescription drugs in Quebec. And at the same time, keep in mind, you can charge very high dispensing fees, especially if your patients comes from private drug plans. Now, the guy with this exclusivity, let's say that we don't know exactly the markups was making. Was it 10%? Was it 5%? Was it 1%? But still, on $300 million a year, this is still a huge sum of money. And Okay, so he was fine. I was penalized for doing these exclusivity contracts because you cannot do that. You're forcing patients to go with you instead of having a choice. And he was fine. How much? How much, Blue?
How much was he fined?
$40,000. Basically, the
Oh
equivalent
wow,
of
that's
1 hour in revenues, which is kind of amazing, basically. Uh,
nothing.
but at the same time, this court decision for me raised the flag of, okay, what the heck is that? These patient support programs for, especially for expensive drugs, what is this exactly? And I was wondering, can we invite somebody to discuss that? And there's a fantastic person that can do exactly just that. Her name is Quinn Grundy. Quinn is a registered nurse and assistant professor at the Faculty of Nursing at the University of Toronto. And since July 1st, she's also the WHO Collaborating Center, the director of the WHO Collaborating Center for Governance, Accountability, and Transparency in the Pharmaceutical Sector, in which I am a fellow researcher. But Quinn has been working a lot on the intersections between medically related industry and public health systems, and the implication for health information, healthcare delivery, and health evidence. In fact, Quinn is the author of a fantastic book called Infiltrating Healthcare, which is a bit fascinating. We always look at the promotion of prescription drugs based on the interaction between the industry and physicians. And nurses are just nurses. They're not making these prescribing decisions, so it's not important. And she showed how first important nurses are in the whole healthcare system, and how central infiltrating the healthcare system through nurses, how important this is for the drug industry, and how important basically is the investment in promotion for the drug industry. Quinn, it's a real pleasure to welcome you, my friend.
Thank you for having me. A pleasure to be here.
It's it's a real pleasure. We know each other since you were a PhD student. I think you were with this PPRC, Pharmaceutical Policy Research Collaboration at the time, and that's it's kind of fun to see somebody go from PhD student becoming a director of an institute. Quinn, I'm a big fan of yours. I just wanted you to know that.
It's such a treat to be on this podcast.
So Quinn, right now you have some research project looking specifically on patient support programs. Can you explain to us what are patient support programs?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's first important to understand this word, patient support program, is a term that the pharmaceutical industry has come up with for these kinds of activities, and is something that they have talked about as patient support programs. And in your, introduction, you alluded, Marc-Andre, to some of these drugs like Remicade, many of them new since maybe the last 10, 20 years. Many of them are very high cost, and partly that's because they're what are called biologics, which means they're actually grown in living cells. So this is a complicated manufacturing process. It also means you have a molecule that is not as stable as the kind in a pill, so it often needs to be stored in special ways, kept at certain temperatures. It needs to be put into the body in special ways. It breaks down in the gut if you take it as a pill by mouth. So often they are injected or they are taken by intravenous IV through your veins. They sometimes have, special handling. They're also very powerful drugs. And while they certainly can improve people's health, they also carry some pretty heavy duty side effects. And so people who take these drugs often need to be followed quite closely, having extra blood tests, having someone to check in with about the things they experience. And so with all this, you have complicated drugs that are a lot of work to take and cost our system a lot of money. And so at the time they are hitting the market, the drug companies, I think, needed a way to convince everyone that these drugs are worth the trouble. And so they began offering what they call patient support programs. And so imagine you have a condition that could benefit from one of these drugs. You're with your physician, seeing your regular doctor in the health system, they write the prescription. As you leave the clinic, you may get a call already from a nurse or case manager who works for the patient support program. They may be an employee of the company that manufactures your drug, or they might work for a company that the drug company has contracted to do this on their behalf. But this person will call you and will first start doing some of the legwork to figure out how you actually access the drug. They'll ask you about your insurance. They'll help do the paperwork to make sure you can get that drug covered and can afford it. They might even offer to pay the deductible, the copay, or get you some free samples until your insurance comes through. They also will then figure out, okay, are you getting this by injection? Do you need to go to an IV clinic? And they'll coordinate that care for you. They'll either book your appointments and find a clinic near you, or one of these company nurses might actually come to your home or even your office if you're busy, or wherever is convenient for you, to teach you how to inject these medications yourself. And then you will often have available a phone number or an email that you can contact for questions. They might figure out if there is a pharmacy nearby that helps you get that drug delivered to your home or your clinic. And they are there for you every step of that way as part of this program.
But in terms of providing support to patients, for me, one of the questions is, shouldn't it be the job of the healthcare system to provide this kind of support? Because now we end up is just, well, this is very useful. This might be very useful for patient, but the private sector will take care of this. It's just drug companies that will now have direct contact with patients in order to provide these additional services that we will not have to pay for in the in our public healthcare system, for example.
I think this is a very good and an open question. And, Marc-Andre, I actually first became aware that these even existed because of a lawsuit brought by the state of California, the Insurance Commission, against AbbVie, a drug manufacturer. And this is a different health system. Obviously, the United States health system is very complicated. But they have some pretty strict laws around their publicly funded insurance programs, Medicare, Medicaid, and the state actually brought this suit alleging that not only was it inappropriate for the company to provide these services, but it actually constituted a kickback, also known as a bribe, that in some ways the services that this nurse was providing through the patient support program were so valuable that they actually presented this material benefit, an inducement, a bribe that would make a prescriber more likely to choose that drug than a similar, equally effective drug that didn't have those supports. And I think the lawsuit really raised some more interesting answers to this question in terms of, is this appropriate? It was actually a nurse who worked for this company who served as a whistleblower. And his concern was that when patients were having side effects or having difficulty with the drug, that nurse who was providing the support, the health teaching, administering the drug, and caring for someone was taking that information back to the drug company's sales representative and not their healthcare team. And so these really important information for someone's safety, well-being, was being rerouted in a way that wasn't putting that patient's interests first. And so I think this was a really interesting case to start raising some of these questions about, well, what kind of care is necessary, is needed, is important, and who should be delivering this?
Just a short story here. I did a presentation recently to a Provincial Association of Neurologists in Canada. And basically, at one point you had somebody from working with a drug company, discussing this new self-injecting pens that they were bringing, and how great it was for this and that specific condition, and the important patient support programs they were providing with this. And then neurologists in the room basically stood to the mic in order to say, well, this is not acceptable because I'm in a faraway region and we don't have access to the same patient support program. Your company should be ashamed of not being able to provide. But I think coming from the neurologist is just, okay, the problem is that the drug company is not providing enough universality in this patient support program. Instead of maybe that's not the role of the drug company to do this. And I was a bit surprised, let's say. Okay. We have patient support programs that can be used as a bit of a marketing device for example, expensive drugs. In the case of Remicade, for example, Remicade, they do have a bit of a generic biosimilar and Flectra that exists, and Remicade remains dominant in Canada, among other things, because of the strong patient support programs they're providing, versus when you have the same drug that is doing the exact same thing beside and being sold at half the price, but still cannot obtain market share because they do not provide the same line of service. Okay, but and for patients, yes, it can be convenient. What is the infrastructures of such programs? Is this the drug companies themselves directly providing these programs to patients? Do we have other types of companies taking care of that? How does that work exactly?
It's complex, and I think we are still have just a partial picture of these relationships between the commercial entities, the healthcare system, and how that's set up. We know this is a common commercial strategy, and there's been a number of systematic reviews conducted actually by drug company employees looking at the different studies conducted on patient support programs there in countries around the world. It seems that most drug companies do offer, a patient support program. And as you mentioned, even as generic competitors, biosimilar competitors come to the market, they are often in a position of creating a patient support program of their own that offers similar services. And I think there's some question is whether we're now getting duplication of effort there. But typically, it seems that although some drug companies or drug manufacturers may have employees in-house, they are more likely, I think, involved in the design of these programs. It is within the marketing department that these programs are created. And it is my understanding that there is like a calculus in terms of return on investment as to which supports and what kinds and combination of support are put together into a program for a particular patient population, a particular disease. But I think probably, and we have, I think, an underestimate of this because these are confidential contracts, but the sense that many drug companies are outsourcing these functions like they do for their clinical trials, for advertising, and many other things that, drug companies do, to essentially what are third-party companies that run these patient support programs on their behalf. Many of these are also multinational corporations in their own right. Some of them are also have functions as drug distributors. Some are running private infusion clinics. Many have kind of a data collection, aggregation, and analytics and insights and consulting function. But what we are seeing is that companies, and an example of one would be Innomar Strategies, they may run patient support programs for many different drug companies or many different drugs. And the mechanics of that, I think we're still digging into.
Just on Innomar Strategy, so I think they are owned by Amerisource Bergen.
Yes.
which is one of the largest insurer in the United States. And if you look, I mean, one of the rare insurance companies that has more important market value than the largest big pharma companies is AmerisourceBergen. So I was kind of surprised to see that basically the main company to which these programs are being outsourced belongs in fact to an even more successful company in terms of market value out there. So.
Another example, we found IQVIA, which is the multinational data aggregator, also has bought a smaller company that then runs patient support programs. And so I think when we see the kinds of companies involved in this space, it also suggests to me that there is great interest and value in the data that is collected in the course of providing these services, which is proprietary and would belong to the drug manufacturer. And we're seeing already, even in the scientific literature, companies doing studies on their own programs using this individual patient data collected in those care interactions.
Okay. Well,
Sorry, I just want to ask some clarification questions. So at first, it sounds like the patient support programs are free and too good to be true, which come with some hidden cost. But then as I keep on listening, it feels like the patient's program is only partially free, and it came with a lot of extra special in-house service provided by the private corporations. However, the kind of service that they provide is to specific group of people who already have very privileged insurance coverage that they know they will be able to, their insurance company will be able to cover the cost. And a lot of patients who live in the far regions are not being supported or considered to be the part of the program at all. And also it provide a lot of it has some duplicate efforts with the public health system and create resource waste at the end of the day. Do I understand the whole concept correctly?
Yeah, you raised some great points, Blue. I would characterize these programs and their supports not as free, but as included. Because yes, patients are not billed for this. Similarly, our public provincial healthcare, like the Ontario Health Insurance Plan, they're not billed for this. Providers are not billed for this. And similarly, private insurance companies are not billed for these services. Drug companies are sponsoring and shouldering the costs of this. So my suspicion, and this we need to verify, is that it is part of the cost of the drug. So in a sense, we are paying for it collectively through public and private drug insurance and through the high prices for drugs that Canada continues to see. In terms of, Blue, you raised important questions about the equity, right? Who is able to get these services? To my understanding, there is no, and I don't know that we have insight into whether certain patients are denied these services or not. I think there is certainly some question around geographic accessibility, but I wouldn't say that's any different than for many people living in rural and remote areas with any other form of health services. I think the question is, in terms of duplication of effort, I do think that these programs, and when we hear from patients or anecdotally, we plan to do more of this work, there is value to nursing care and to medication related care. And in some ways, I think these programs are filling gaps in our system that should not exist. But I think, as Marc-Andre brought up earlier, we don't want to get trapped in this mindset of, okay, the drug companies provide all these patient support programs. As a public system, we couldn't possibly do the same thing. I think we have to actually challenge that and rethink the model. So when we provide care in a publicly funded system, we don't design models of care around a particular branded therapeutic product. We design a model of care around a health need. So what kind of care, and we need to, I think, have some more conversations about these things. We need to be able to study these programs to understand what is the health need and what kind of care is needed. And I'm thinking more holistic chronic disease care about the whole person and their whole health. And that kind of nursing care is so valuable, and not just how do we help you take your one branded medicine.
Mhm.
And that way we don't get caught up in trying to figure out how we pay for publicly funded nurses to learn the 15 different injection device proprietary designs and keep up with the rapid innovation. But we say, okay, maybe we don't need 15 different of the slightly similar but a bit different proprietary things, and we care for people with this condition with these health needs in some sort of program. But it will kind of, we need to challenge the model, I think.
I like this because now I'm hearing the registered nurse in you right now. So, that brings me to another question, because I mean we're talking about patient support programs, the different companies managing this, data being collected, sales reps, but nurses are central to these patient support programs, and basically that creates, I mean, a lot of employment for different nurses. And for me, this is where things can become a bit problematic, in the sense that, okay, now we have a private sector for nurses to work, in fact, for drug companies in helping patients based on proprietary products that offer specific programs, and not basically with the objectives of what is the health need of that specific population. So can you tell us a bit more in terms of the impact these PSPs, patient support programs, can have over nurses as employees here?
I think it's a really interesting question, because what we see with a patient support program is really a reconfiguration of the relationships between a patient and their health professionals. And Marc-Andre, you can probably speak more to this too. In France, they actually commissioned this independent investigation into patient support programs, and concluded that they created situations where the incentives were completely misaligned and created role confusion. And we're planning to do some research to really understand from the patient perspective, what is it like to be prescribed one of these drugs, referred to a program, get your infusions? Do they always understand which nurse works for who is their point of contact, how they share information, how the team works together, and to really understand what navigating their care through these different entities and companies is like. And I think that will be interesting to hear from patients, what that feels like, and does that meet their needs. I think from a professional standpoint, there really is a question, and I think pharmacists also, in how they are situated within the health system, grapple with this question even more frequently. What does it mean to be a health professional, self-regulated in this social contract with society, saying I will put the patient interest first, but then to also be accountable to your employer, which is a corporation. And I think we see a lot of ethical issues arise that way. I think some of it could be mitigated, just as the College of Pharmacists has now turned its attention to these patient support programs. Do we similarly have oversight over the employment conditions and situations where nurses working for these programs, and the work that they do? I don't know, and I think that's also part of what we hope to understand a little bit.
Fantastic. And you mentioned a report in France. So I think 2008, IGAS, Inspecteur Général des Affaires Sociales, basically had this huge report in terms of what is this new beast that are PSPs, patient support programs. And basically, yes, like you were saying, it creates this huge confusion. Let's get rid of the whole thing as soon as possible. And if we need to provide the support to patients, let's provide this, but through the public healthcare system, not on a proprietary basis. And some of the savings we can do in the public healthcare system by outsourcing these services to PSPs. I think it's important, as you mentioned, that, well, we end up with transferring employees as well. So going back to the case of Remicade versus Inflectra, so the same drug, not the same basis for support, but at the same time, we end up massively buying Remicade instead of Inflectra. So this is in fact costing more to the public healthcare system, and we end up with sending potential employees, nurses in the public sector into the private sector as well, in order to defend a model that is pushing for more expensive type of care. Now, I mean, you've been grappling with these issues for a long time. Since your book about the infiltration of healthcare, now you're looking at PSPs, patient support programs. In terms of future research, what do you hope you will be able to achieve with this type of research? Big question here.
Yes, I mean, I think first of all, especially as Canada again circles around this question of pharmacare, this is an aspect of our pharmaceutical system that it remains still very invisible. I think we are seeing these kinds of programs cluster around the newest technologies, the higher cost drugs. I think inevitably these are part of the conversation around what is value look like in pharmaceuticals, which ones can we pay for, what does it mean to have an equitable and sustainable pharmaceutical policy or plan in Canada. And so I think with our research, we first want to get the lay of the land and kind of bring to light what this situation is. And then I think it's really important. We've had investigations at the policy level, like with EGAS. We've had the lawsuits in the United States, kind of at this high level view. But there really is very little understanding of what is the patient experience, what is it like to work with these programs as a nurse or a physician in the publicly funded health system? How do you coordinate care? What is it like to work for these programs, right? Is it really truly providing a more attractive employment option? And then we need to think of that as a labor market, right, to address some of our health human resource crises. So there has been some work done, but it is almost exclusively done by employees of drug manufacturers, sponsored by the manufacturer, using data they have collected through their own programs. And so we hope to provide kind of an independent lens and find that range of experience with these programs to really wrap our heads around what is going on here. I think in order to really identify where are the issues or the pressure points, or especially as we're thinking about things like pharmacare, maybe.
Quinn, thank you so much. Well, anything else you would like to add on this issue? Because I think you provide a fantastic overview, and this is super interesting and challenging in many ways, in the sense that you're asking a lot of great questions in terms of where the heck are we going with all this, basically, because it seems that we opened the door, and not that we opened a little bit a door. We open the door, we cross the door, we basically install ourselves in a new system, and we just don't have a clue about how this system is working and what is the impact of this new reality of patient support programs that is somewhat central to the new business model for very expensive drugs.
Yeah, and I agree that's a good analogy, because I think in many ways they probably do fill gaps within a publicly funded health system that should not exist. Mm-hmm. But having opened that door, and we're now feel we're on a path and trying to grapple with this kind of invisible landscape, when instead I think we need to step back and say, well, what are those gaps? What is the health need? And how do we meet it in a way that is equitable, sustainable and cost effective. And I would never understate the value of nursing care for people living with chronic illnesses and taking complicated medications. And that, I think, is fundamentally my interest in these, is that it's a form of care, and how do we deliver it most effectively?
So, Quinn, you can be sure we will be following you, reading you, and we look forward to your next publications on these issues, because this is a very important issue that you've been tackling. So thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Please follow us online by registering for our website's newsletter at carleton.ca/ghost management. You can also follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @GM Research Group. Our musical theme is Hablando por Hablar by Alex Cuba. The Ghost Management Research Project is funded through an Insight grant from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada and its Initiative for Digital Citizen Research. The funders had no role in the design, conduct, or publication of the content. Thank you for your interest, and we'll see you soon.